Was heißt das? Nicht in der Mitte?
Dass du den Bildschirm ein bisschen so machen musst, genau. Sieht doch viel besser aus.
Da ist
Ja.
jemand.
Kannst du denn den Bildschirm auch sehen?
Ja.
Gut. Darum geht's.
Hi, Sam.
Hello, Farah.
Can you provide co-share for the three systems I logged in, because I still have some bandwidth problems and I might need to go to another Wi-Fi, and I would like to record, and it would be good if I can record in portrait and you portrait and you record in gallery, or how do you do it? I think you normally...
Yes, I can give you permission to record. So hang on one second. Let's see.
I don't know which ones. Give it to the three of us.
Okay, hang on. I can give everyone the ability to record.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Do that.
Okay, you are now co-host on Heiner Banking, and I'll make you co-host on your other one.
Perfect. So you can see my screen share?
I can see Gestalt Competence 1 and 7.
Perfect. And there are more. There are even 10.
Okay, so you should be able to record now. So can you verify?
I can try to verify now. I have to stop the share and do... No, please request recording. I didn't get it yet.
Let's
Heiner,
see.
not the other ones.
I've given co-host to both of your accounts.
I'm
you want 4 futures. Okay, you've got 3 accounts. Hang on one second.
Yeah, sure. I have, as you know.
Okay, you are now able to do it on all 3. Sorry, I haven't greeted you yet, Farah. I'm still trying to respond to Heiner.
Well, she knows.
Hi.
There's other priorities in the world.
There's Stacy. Hey, there's Glenn. We haven't seen Glenn in quite a while.
Hey, good to see you. Been on holiday, so a lot of stuff happened. But I heard rumors that Heiner Banking was on today, so.
I think Heiner's been spreading those rumors. Yeah.
Okay.
I've helped him spread them. Hey, just very quick, Farah, what time zone are you in?
I'm in what kinds of? I didn't
I was just
get it.
curious what time zone you're in. What part of the world?
Oh, I'm in Berlin.
Oh, okay. Oh, very close to Heiner then. Okay. So Heiner, all 3 of your accounts are now co-host. Can you verify that you can record?
Well, I'm set.
You're done?
I'm done.
Okay.
You see, we did for this film production various perspectives. On my iPhone to have the best audio and the best signal. So I have to look up to look directly into the camera. But if I look onto the screen, I can follow what's on the screen when I do a screen share.
Okay. All right.
Well, we see.
Fully equipped, fully enabled. You're ready to go. And we've got 5 people.
We probably wait a little longer. So, Farah, do you know Stacy?
No.
Why don't you introduce yourself?
He was addressing you.
It's an offer you can't refuse, Stacy.
Well,
The other way around.
I'm Stacy. I'm in New York, and I've been coming to these conversations for a couple of years, and I'm here mostly to learn And if I can help out in any way, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. I'm Farah. I stay in Berlin, and I have worked in some projects together with Heiner, so I'm a bit familiar with the things he's doing. And well, in the moment it's quite hot here in Berlin. Maybe in New York also.
It's actually pretty nice here in New York now.
Yes.
We went through a heat wave. We had, at least where I am, we had blackouts from a storm for a few days, and we were lucky during the blackouts, everything was cool. So
Oh, okay.
it goes up and down.
I was with Farah in a blackout situation in Cyprus some years ago. And it was close to the national airport of Cyprus that all the ammunition, all the gigatons of explosives got off.
Like in Beirut.
The whole island was without any electricity. And now I remember Beirut, where everything is closed. So for me, a blackout is something quite different from what you know about blackouts in New York, because I think you're rather used to them.
They're usually pretty short and just an inconvenience more than anything else.
So I lost everything in Beirut once. So for me, Beirut is a very hot spot on this planet. Jean-Claude was presenting last week, and I hope I can connect to what he presented yesterday, last week. And Glenn is an old China hand like Sam in our Zoom conversations. So you see, I'm still trying to, how do you say, catch some time.
Stall? Is that the word you're looking for? Stall for time?
But not quite so obvious.
Well, he wanted a word.
Chillin'.
So why don't you introduce yourself, Jean-Claude? I think Farah has not met you, and Farah was working with me maybe since about 25 years on various fronts.
Well, it's good to see you all back after a week. Has anybody been able to process everything that has been said, or has it frightened you so much that you said, well, I'll let it go?
I actually reached out to a couple of people because I had wanted you to speak with them. And what I got really was to put it off for a few weeks, that this is a busy time. Interestingly enough, though, I was on a community page and I saw a conversation that was really exciting to me because it was very organically somebody talking about our schools locally and putting forth a really outside the box idea. And it was interesting to watch how that conversation went. I will try to send it at some point. What I find is the biggest issue is that more people come to these spaces wanting something than wanting to give something. And if you try to offer something where you can bring them all together, where maybe they can find a way to overlap and interweave, there's some I don't know what the hesitation is from, but that's what I'm sort of paying attention to at the moment. I'm feeling a little frustrated by.
Stacey, I'm curious whether that was Lauren's video on education pods.
You know, she actually sent me that video after the conversation. Yes, I had asked to, it was very coincidental that that was the video I got after.
Do any of you here, maybe Heiner, you, do you know Pavel Shukla from Moscow?
No?
He's working on new education models as well and has been for about a decade.
I should get him. But regarding to Jean-Paul's question, I was only in part attending your session last weekend, but I looked at it and I hope I can make some connections to your slides, but it all depends on who will be joining us. Normally we give another 5 or 10 minutes. So when I do my slides, people are not getting lost.
Yeah, we have 8 people. We have Colin and Joshua as well.
Well,
I expect
we have
Alex as well.
already.
So we'll have at least 9.
Yes. You recommend, you're in charge, Sam, when we should start.
You are in charge. I am merely helping.
Okay.
So just a quick question, Heiner. The actual presentation part, how long do you normally want to target this for?
You know, I have tons of slides. I spoke of always making a terse, brief appetizer, like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It depends on if you raise your hand and immediately want to intervene, or if you add questions to the chat box, it's easier. And then I could go into various areas for further discussions, what it means to consciousness, to space cognition, to interdisciplinarity, to intercultural or meditation or whatever issues. It is all depending on where we are. And as I think as the time is running, I feel if you don't object, I just start.
So just one more question. Do you encourage back and forth interaction as you speak, or would you prefer that questions be deferred to the end?
Well, if someone cannot sit still on his seat and really has to ask this question because he doesn't get what I mean by space, I mean, essential questions to understand, then I have to enlarge a little bit. But normally, for the flow of the thought and the slides, it's sometimes better to pause and maybe even lump questions and maybe go next time even into breakout rooms. It all depends on where we are after I start my idea on our GCC experiments since now a couple of years.
Okay, that was just to assist in the facilitation mode that you want. So I will recommend that people hold questions to the end unless they just absolutely have to check out because of something you said. Okay? All right, so at this point, the question is, do you want some people to do some optional check-ins, or do you think we've already done that? And if so, then everybody please go on mute until Heiner is done. Put questions.
Yes, run, and after my presentation, if someone has questions, he should introduce himself. Otherwise, who will spread and the recording somehow distributed, distorted. So I start.
All right, Heiner, you're on. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking.
Okay, fasten seatbelts. So you see we do here, thanks to Fleming Funch and Tammy, some GCC experiments. And I call them in the invitation, the first exercises I did on one-on-ones. I think it's very important that people learn to know each other and sometimes to really ask personal questions. Sometimes it's very good that people meet for 1 hour or hours. The next exercise we did in the GCC experiments was the hot seat. That was quite a challenging one. So you see, Tammy is from the field of media, so she knows all the terms. And so a hot seat is something like a deep investigation, critical, hot, burning, like in the medieval, like they fried fishes. And the third experiment, we did a deep dive, and there we had the idea we can do it for long. Everybody has a couple of sessions, maybe presenting all his theories in maybe a couple of weeks, or we do a deep dive with my idea of a deep dive being, I have 3 steps, like saying from where, why, and where to in separate sessions with prepared short presentations, who I am, from where I'm coming, and why, and where to, showing my motivations. And I have recorded this on the first session, and I will go now to the second slide. I have a technical problem. Okay.
While you're dealing with a technical problem, if you've got a display like this, it might help to maximize the content portion of it as much as possible, just to fill up the screen.
Yes, that was part of my problem. I tried to go into representation. Okay, so my real concern is who
Heiner, did you expect the display to change? Because the display is still showing the same thing for me.
It is now a second slide. Can you see it?
It still says GCC Experiment Deep Dive Part 3.
No, no, I pushed the second slide.
Are you on a different screen?
Yes.
We're seeing the same one.
Yeah.
Yes. Same one.
Just move your window to the other, move your actual content to the actual screen being shared.
Is it better now?
Yes.
Yes, we see generalist and specialist.
Okay, so you see my concern is from where, why, and where to, who I am. Am I a generalist? I'm a specialist? Am I an engineer or a cultural guy or an educator? And so I did for another presentation a time slide showing what we did in the second deep dive, that I come from geosciences, from planning, national planning and local planning. And I worked in computer graphics and visualization. And over the years of 20, 30 years, I moved more and more into cultural projects or into global projects again around the education for sustainable development or citizen sciences or the SDGs. So my questions are very, very deep. How do we communicate? We had experiments in our GCC groups that we say the same words, but we mean different things. So we are, as humans, like the computers, interference machines. We somehow try to guess the meaning from the context, from the words we are using, and how we interpret how this person understands a certain definition or meaning. So I was playing since long. This I did with Farah 20 years ago, was looking into what is the challenge of the communicative society. So you see, close to the GCC title, and there we already had 20 years ago, how can we communicate? And is the world a prison, a varieté, a labyrinth, or a bomb, or like the sweet pie in a fairy tale, or the final flood of cyberculture? So you see, my urging here is very deep and reflective. And what I'm presenting here today is that we are not in one box only. Even when I'm in education, I sometimes have to do transforming politics or engage in active protest. And I've done it for the Iraq war intensively, but I cannot go into any demonstration. So what I feel is we are multimodal persons, persons who have various identities, and we are not crazy when looking with micro and macro eyes in the same time. And that is what I'm coming to in a little moment. So the whole concept, what I'm concerned about, and this is the third part of our deep dive here, what I'm actually doing. And I was with UNESCO Decade for Sustainability Education looking into the Gestalt competences. What are the competences we have to bring to the citizens, but also to the pupils? And I'm focusing here in particular on how we present and have knowledge and share meaning and integrate different perspectives and develop the tolerant approach to that as well. This I promised to you last time. Harry, I don't know if Harry van der Velde is with us here. He's also part with Tammy in this group since long. He was stumbling, grasping, groping, grokking on what I'm doing. And he recently prepared these visualizations for me that I say the problems are so complex that we are perplexed. The problematique, like the Club of Rome in the late 60s already mentioned first, is so overwhelming, and so we are so under-equipped, so evolutionary stuck in our sweet isolation and only see something with the direct eye and the short term, and everything would be reflecting is not in the primal and orienting view of brain research. So what he did, and actually I would like to go with you the work on how Harry tried to interpret me, saying we have to step out of the box, as Stacy just mentioned. What can we do when we have so good and so much we have to reflect on what we see and who sees, and is the observer part of the picture? So anyway, these are parts of workshops we do. I go into a few other more to really say that I developed cognitive spaces, mental models, mindscapes. You see, these are all difficult words which science had lots of problems with 25 and more years ago. So where I created orientation spaces to really help us, like in the real world, point at what it is about. Point us to possibilities, Anthony Judge called it one day. And so I'm really here on a kindergarten level, but also on a deep cognitive and philosophical level, wondering on how can we come to grips with extra dimensions through technology, through travel, through modern science. We come to quite different information than people have realized 100 or 1,000 or 5,000 years ago. I played with Harry 2-3 years ago on how to expand our ways we see and communicate. And we took with a Godfly before, having a mental space and a cognitive space and a visionary space, we looked into why don't we as humans adapt to the challenges of modern times to really include other antennas, include the micro and the macro view. And I was recently in an event with Joschka Fischer. He was a green revolutionary and foreign minister of Germany, and Madeleine Albright. And she said, he is such a great philosopher because he thinks on the national and the European level at the same time. And that she really praised him as a philosopher through that showed me how little we are used to take multi-perspectives and multimodal and multi-sensor approaches on. So I'm playing with such visualizers because what I'm doing is very abstract since some time. One of the great visualizers for me was Kurt Hanks, where we did workshops on out-of-the-box thinking and paradigm mapping. Or we looked into paradigm mapping, and later in '95, we even spoke about meta paradigms to really make maps and models, and that is central part of my approach to really show who is where. So there is Wilbur and me, and we expand our territories and our viewpoints, and we expand the maps. And the maps I also want to do in 3D as immersive models. So here we are, and I'm with two youth organizations. One is Makers for Humanity. The other is Youth for Planet, where we look with young people, how can we become not only entrepreneurs, but also makers. And this is a challenge I revisited after 30 years recently, to really see how can we really integrate the big issues we have at our hands. So anyways, these are only appetizers, as I promised you to give you an idea from where, why, and where to what I'm doing. And we, with Farah, that's why I invited her, we did around the Entrepreneurship Summit for many years, open spaces, to really bring the people and the issues and the experiments and the encounters together and discuss what is a systems entrepreneur, a globe entrepreneur, and how can we empower people. And that is what we do with Positive News, with children here on a carpet, discussing with time credits, that we come to other forms of dialogue, other forms of conversations, and coming together and community building, because a community can be very small. It can be my family, my nation, all humanity. So I'm coming soon now to the end. I'm working in the international field since the mid-70s. United Nations Development Environmental Program, later came Rio, but I focus very much on the civil society because they should involve the people, the you and the society. And I work very much on linking of the issues. So the MDGs and SDGs we did with dialogue conversation centers in America, but also in Cyprus, on how to linking the SDGs, because it's foolish to put a lot of money into one issue and then after 5 years going on to another project. The SDGs really ask us to go into the deep drivers and the root causes, and there I'm in some boards to really look into it wisely. So to go to the deep root causes, the drivers, to the issues. And that's another very important field in my field of community building. And we have done it with the Millennium Project, 56 nations, collecting global challenges facing humanity over 20 years. We did a lot of presentations and papers on how to really wisely address the issues, because we are all made small as individuals, not being allowed to take on a big picture and think big, and being stuck in our local problems. We as humans have the potential to really pan and zoom, take the micro and the macro, and there are all these dialect experiments I just mentioned coming together in the field of multi-track diplomacy, peacemaking, interreligious, ecological discussions on how to really going to the root causes. What is ecology, economy, ecumeny, but also economy? Can we think all this together? So you see, I'm nearly coming to an end. I am now trying to hail as Heiner 2020, discussing such issues. And I would like to discuss with you further on what is space, what is cognition, what is immersion, what is augmented reality. And there are we with Doug Engelbert and McLuhan. Can we as humans create scaffoldings like grids of augmented reality to really share imagination? And there we are in deep fields of what is cultural evolution, what is consciousness, what is integral, what is Jean Gebser, and what is the problem to use systems thinking and model thinking in kindergarten and with creative people, as humans are model-making animals. So anyway, I have much, much more, but I promised you to finish in about 15 or 20 minutes, and I think my time is up. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Heiner. So, by the way, you know we have 2 hours. So to restrict it to 15 minutes is not necessary if you'd like to do any more on your presentation.
Well, it depends on where the questions go. I have lots of materials available, and after some search time, I really could go into consciousness and cognition or multimedia or education or augmented reality, or as John Paul was presenting last weekend, how to bring it down to the town hall, how to get the intersectorial strategic dilemma together. And having seen that the people in preparation of Rio 92 were sketching in intersectorial strategic dilemma, and we are still into our artificial boundaries of sectorial confinements, that the health people don't speak to the infrastructure people and the law people don't speak to academia or vice versa. So anyway, I don't want to ramble on.
So at this point, you want to open it up to questions, right? So let me just invite some questions. And if no one else has, I've got at least 3 myself. So Jean-Claude, Jean-Paul, you're on the floor.
Yes, I love the presentation, Heiner, and we already talked about your boxes idea over the email together a few weeks ago. I myself have the School of Talents, and the greatest difficulty I find is getting the formal institutions to participate. At a human level, I agree with you, the consciousness and everything, but I talked with ministers in the Netherlands, and all they wanted is not awareness, no consciousness. They wanted exactly the opposite, and that is something, a big struggle. If I reach out to 17, 18, 19-year-olds or older who are free to connect to whatever I have to offer and what you have to offer, then we have something, but they're already dogmatized for the underlying ages. How can we deal with the system? How can we connect the system with it? How can we get these politicians to accept that this the renewal that you are proposing is into their benefit and safe for them, better than holding on to the old structure of sitting down, shut up, and structure people into these old dogmas?
Yes, there is some indoctrination. There is sectarianism of science. There is much people being afraid that we do something out of the box. And you see, I worked with FARA and the Council of Towns and Regions. They all like it as long as it stays on the direct practical level. But if you go into other sectors or onto other levels, then they say, we don't have a mandate. And when in political environments are questioned, what the hell are you doing? Can't you stick to one thing and put a label here on your hat? You're an engineer or whatever. Then it shows we are afraid, and it is about who is in charge and who is ruling the money. So you see Mrs. Brundtland, a lady I really appreciated, being not only the state president, but the mother of Rio, during the World Health Organization in the end. It is all coming down to the turfs, to the money. When she finally restructuring her World Health Organization is called on, and the other chieftains say, this is foot is FAO in Rome. This is climate, that is Geneva. You are also in Geneva, but it's WMO, not WHO. So you see, it's what I call turfs. And when we discuss this, it is the early discussion of what is transdisciplinarity. The first international transdisciplinary conference was '94 in Aribida. And we said, we have to come to terms what we mean. And interdisciplinarity is still the garden fences, and we shake hands, the economists with the lawyers and the health researchers, and then we make another deal and another project for another 3 years, and that's it. But in Aribida we said, put down the garden fences. Everybody, like a child in kindergarten, goes to the neighbor's sandbox and learns the thinking, the tools, the languages, and then moves on. So the whole idea, can we really do pragmatic, practical work, means that we have to go beyond the jargon. So you see, the system science schools, they are in 4 main schools and they fight against each other. But if we go to terms like humans are model making animals, and a model is something we build like in a sandbox, and it's not a girl as a model, but modulus, something we design, gestalten, you see, it's all difficult. I have most of my words not available when I speak in English. It is really to be contagious and having enough time and attention span so people can ask questions. So I rambled on too long, Jean-Claude. It is very difficult. Yes, they agree as long as it is inside their turf and they can control it. We have to come to citizen sciences, communities, other forms of voting, going to multi-track diplomacy and peacemaking, as I just mentioned, with the originators of the early reports of the Club of Rome in the late 60s, early 70s, not 72. That was too late. That was just modeling. But the original approaches with practical people were much wider. They included participatory, normative, and prognostic futures, and not just making world models they later called scenarios. And these are very often dumb and self-fulfilling prophecies. And there's a high end of every scenario and a much worse case than in the high end.
Anyone else? I have a question. So Heiner, a couple of quick points. Glenn, I'll get to you if okay after I ask this one. And that is just to get some things out of the way. Do you know Dino Karabeg at the University of Oslo?
You always give me names I don't know. I'm in my sweet isolation.
That's part of the problem, right? The problem that you're talking about, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So the reason I bring up Dino is because he has written papers, and I think he's working on a book on a topic he calls polyscopy. And polyscopy, I think, maps to the concept that you're talking about, which is being able to run the spectrum from micro to macro, from different perspectives to look at different, views of things. So he and his polyscopy and you and your presentation, I think, have a lot to potentially discuss. And I just wanted to put that placeholder out there. He and I have been talking about that for about 7 or 8 years, potentially. And in fact, one period we were talking probably 6 days a week, an hour and a half a day for a couple of years. So it's very, very involved, some of those discussions. In fact, those discussions went into something that I've been calling the COI, the Community of Impact. And that I think I might want to present sometime soon. Then the next thing was this whole thing about different views and creating understanding or interpretation, or what you now call scenarios, in my mind is integral to what we call intelligence. And the reason I bring that up is because this word intelligence has been used in different contexts, in particular military intelligence, for example, which I think is actually very useful in understanding this phenomenon. Because only in military intelligence do I find a more systematic way of gathering information, doing interpretation, creating situation assessment, and then figuring out, what action to take. I find that other discussions of intelligence understand that, but they don't do that in quite so systematized a way. So even though you may object to the whole point of military intelligence, I think that's an interesting model for us to consider and talk about. So I put that on the table as well. The next one is...
Let me just enter, because otherwise we're getting lost. This, what you call military intelligence, I looked into. We started the International Space Year in 91, 92. And I saw that the original military strategy guys had compassion, and they created not just war rooms, like you say in English, but peace rooms, situation rooms, and they considered the tactics and the strategies, the scales, scopes, proportions, consequences. And that means how much happiness and suffering is involved. So all these discussions on AI and data economics and big data and not smart data and data without information and knowledge and wisdom and being situational, these are all words which are very, very dangerous. But I felt when you see that the real caring is not to make a scharmützel and not to make a war.
What was that last word, scharmützel?
And be really wise. And if wise is close to intelligent, then I'm with you.
So that's another whole discussion right there. And I would like to have that at some point. So can I make 2 other points?
Sure. I just wanted to use the communication.
Yeah, no, I note that, and I want to have that, in the backlog. I note that for the backlog for another discussion. But there's a point I want to connect between what Jean-Paul said and what you said, and which is, he asked why we cannot do this, at various different levels, and the experience of going through with conversations with political appointees and others, and how they're stuck in their own boxes. This, I think, goes back to a theme that we've been discussing for 2 or 3 years, which is discomfort. People find discomfort when they're asked to move out of their boxes or their comfort zones, right? And part of that discomfort comes from incompetence. If they're not competent outside their box, they feel like they don't know enough. If they don't know enough, then they can't come across as smart and authoritative and, respectable, etc., right? And if you can't come across that way, then there's potentially a problem of showing your ignorance, showing that you do not know. which then comes to shame. People don't want to be shamed, right? I don't want to, for most of my life, I kept from speaking out because I thought, oh, well, if I speak something, people are going to know how stupid I am and that I don't know exactly what I'm talking about. But if you sort of get past that and say, okay, now it is necessary to get out of the box in order to understand someone else's box or mental model or whatever other word you want to apply. And that only by then leaning in and just really digging into your ignorance areas and trying to learn and getting over that discomfort, getting over that shame, getting over that fear, can you then start to actually make those connections? And I think that takes a lot. It takes a lot for people to get out of that comfort zone, out of that box, and lean in to say, okay, I don't know, you tell me. Politicians are typically not going to do that, right? They have to appear respectable. They have to appear authoritative. Teachers, in fact, have to do this. Otherwise, they say, you know, students are saying, why don't you know? It's a big barrier. But until we get across that barrier, these boxes are still going to confine us. Okay, so let me just leave it for there. Over.
So the idea with these boxes is to reflect the boxes and consider them mental construct, to move them away. And there's a poem from Friedrich Rückert which really expresses that. We are really these people who create our own cages, but only if we dare to step out and reflect the meanings and the definitions and then the contextuality, and understand that we are not all specialists, but we are, as human beings, originally very curious generalists, and we are made through education more and more specialists. And there we come to general education, kindergarten education, to phenomenology, and all these schools where we are put into boxes. So anyway, this is going deep into epistemology, ontology, phenomenology, and all the scientists created their own little turfs to say, get out of here, you have no mandate. But if we want to really empower, then we should work with young people. And we work here a lot in vocational training and older people and people before going to study. And they are lost. They are already so over-specialized and not realizing their overclaims and their oversimplifications. They have no overview, they have no orientation, and that's why they are so stuck.
Yeah.
You have the last question, and John Paul was raising his hand.
I think Glenn had his hand up before as well. So let's go Glenn and John Paul, okay?
Yeah, great. Great conversation. So, first of all, the issue that you're describing is global, clearly, and you're bringing attention to a certain pattern that I also recognize very much, which is the tendency to get stuck into one module of thinking or one kind of a perspective where you see certain things, you cherry pick certain facts to support that perspective, and by identifying with that perspective, one becomes incapable of seeing what's other kinds of facts that don't fit into that particular narrative, and also, you know, more problematically, become incapable of understanding other people, and therefore incapable of working with other people. And so that sort of seems like the problem, as you define it, or the issue, which, let's say, prevents cultural evolution and prevents global collaboration. And I totally agree with that. Then you're pointing towards the multimodal, the multidisciplinary. What could be a a way for us to understand complexity, a complex multidimensional system, and be able to speak and communicate insights between these mental models, and hopefully really learn to become free from the mental models, is also one of the main themes that I see here. And this, of course, brings to mind various visualization tools, some of which we saw in the slides, perhaps even more advanced tools like a computer simulation of events that happen in space. And this is where I was interested when Sam brought in this issue of military intelligence. I don't know much about it, but I've been following Jocko Willink a little bit, actually read his book. And one thing I have an impression is there's something about, patterns of movement on the ground, which can be seen through senses, which seems very central to, the military way of thinking. In some sense, it's a very event-based language. Talks about buildings, talks about places, talks about actions. It's a very concrete way of thinking, which sort of sidesteps all of the many vague categories which we tend to understand differently, therefore leads us into misunderstanding. And that also interests me a great deal if we're looking for what could be a solution to this. What could be tools we could use to understand complex situations. And this, of course, is my favorite concept, is this idea of patterns of movement in space, and also behavior, which I kind of think about as the human being's pattern of movement in space. And this is, I think, is a bit in line with at least part of military intelligence and maybe, real intelligence. So maybe that's a clue. So I guess a question that sort of comes up from that and is, could there be a tool which could help us to understand very complex situations? And maybe this idea of patterns of movement in space could be, and also behavior, could be a simplifier to help us maneuver through this complexity. So that's what came to me.
Yes, you see, my discussions in that field, especially with the systems people, is that they have all their ideas. What is a sign? What is a symbol? What is an icon? What is a field? What is a pattern? And if we don't embody it, and that's why I propose alternative spaces where I can put imaginary and sense information and patterns and fields, like I showed that we in the environment take many information in which are not coded, so they cannot be put easily with X, Y, Z and location and context into a computer, which are the same important. And if we don't allow this space of extra cognition, brain researchers speak about 17 dimensions in the brain we calculate in parallel. And then I have the discussion with them, are they extensional or are they just qualities in a spectrum? So anyway, what we need to make very sure when we talk about fields or patterns and senses and sounds and vibrations, that we share the common frames of references. And only when we point to this with pointers of possibilities, then we might have a chance. but we need to be very sure how ignorant and how little we know. So I was just yesterday in discussions on marine technologies and harvesting and the Gulf Stream and everything we cannot get hold of, but there are dramatic changes, and we take a policy on, like in fisheries industries, that all fishes have their contingents, their categories. But if it's an octopus, we don't have numbers for that, so they can kill all the octopuses only as an example, because we have no idea what they might be good for. Maybe krill or other things. And that's why we, with Harry, have been creating this multimodal deep sea fish to really make us a little bit more modest. Next.
Yes, Jean-Paul.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, I have to apologize that I have to run off in a minute. And although this is really one of my themes, I love it very much. And I would like to continue a pursuit on this. So I will certainly look back at the video. But one of the things is that I would like to suggest that we focus on trying to create space for change, for leadership, for create space, because what I see in my own model also, that we are very much fixated worldwide on systems of control. And those systems of control, they, if they get challenged, they produce, they need to open up, and they produce a sensation of chaos. A little bit what Sam says, you know, that the people feel insecure, that suddenly they have to lose the securities. Politicians are very much like that, you know, because they depend on the votes of millions of people. So they are very little inclined to introduce change. So the one who has to introduce change through awareness are we ourselves. But we have to demand these people that through this change, we can feed the control systems with new impulses, which give them bigger security again for the future. So we need our space. And that space is created by, for instance, what you're doing, presenting Heiner, or what I'm doing with the School of Talents, where we can connect. We don't want to change the entire system, because we do need cognitive education systems. We do need specialization in different type of fields. We do need these type of structures of going into depth about ICT or architecture or whatever other kind of things. But we also need the part where people start reflecting for themselves and critically looking at society and our way of dealing with things, so that even those kind of fixated systems can get to their own change, or change in a whole, out of the box, bringing the boxes back together. That's probably maybe about 10% of reality, but it does affect the 100% of reality. And that particular part, I propose that we try to create for ourselves that space and show to all those people who depend on that, and that is safe, that it's okay. We're not going to challenge everybody. We are going to introduce that type of innovation, which is, well, saving a lot of things, including the old systems.
Did you want to respond, or can I interject also? No response? Heiner, can you hear me? Can anybody hear me? Okay, so if not a response, let me see if those, let's say Farah, Stacy, Kayla, Joshua, Colin, we haven't heard from you guys. Tees, would you like to say something? Because I've got plenty of questions, but I don't want to monopolize and remove that opportunity for you guys to be here. Okay, well, I will ask a question then. Oh, Josh, you go.
Yeah, I'm just trying to be patient because I can't see everybody. So I was just swiping through the iPhone to look to see where everyone else is at. I just feel like we're getting a little heady, just to be straight up, just meaning if we could just slow it down ever so slightly and just intake all this. There's just so much information. So if we could maybe just slow it down ever so slightly, maybe just, hey, do you have anything to say? Okay, now next. Okay, so we're going to move on. Let's just ease into it, because I think everybody needs a chance to ease into. There's so much. We're talking about at least 7 or 8 different concepts with 7 or 8 different other sides on the back end of those 7 or 8 concepts. So maybe we can sort of ease into where we're at and where we're going. Is that possible, Heiner? Where maybe I could ask, actually the question I'd like to ask Heiner is, with all of this multimodal thinking and with all of these possible systems and solutions and problems, what would be an ideal 3 years from now? Heiner is happy, he's enjoying life, and that's because something happened, or maybe 3 things happened. If I could ask you, what are the 3 things that have happened 3 years from now that made you feel that your work for so long has come to fruition and you can relax and your soul can be at ease? That's the question I would ask you, Heiner, if that's okay. And I don't mean to diverge the conversation, but I just wanted to slow down and sort of, instead of getting all crazy with all the stuff going on, what would feel so good in your heart that the system for futures, Heiner2020.earth, what happened? What happened that I can say, yeah, we all helped you make that happen and we all did it together? Is that a fair enough question to ask, Heiner? Is that okay?
Oh, think big or your brain shrinks. We just had 30 years back, 30 years forward. So 3 years, I mean, that's nothing. But it should be on the same way. We should ask these very simple, well-packed questions like you just raised them. When I dream of what would be necessary is to really overcome this dualistic mindset of right, wrong. And everybody who has an extra reality is either schizophrene and they should do some lobotomy and cut between the brain halves, but to come to modes that we understand that we are physical people, we are spiritual people, we are social people, we are all this together. And we should not label, as I mentioned before, someone belongs into a certain box and has a certain profession, but really being a gatecrasher towards social commons, like a real civic being. And that's what I'm trying around citizen sciences, that we realize you can make a map of the outer space. And sometimes it's very good to have a picture of the globe, but really transcend the scales and transcend the sectors and be more in yourself safe by not being labeled and put in one box. One example which gave me a lot of hope, as you have the Buddha behind you, there is some meditation research, longitudinal studies with 200 people. When these people in meditation research take in, beside all their meditation and going to swimming, as Count Durkheim said, taking in extra parts which are called perspective units, then you reflect on who you are, where you are, what is the scale, the scope, the proportions, the consequences. Then it is more like a liveliness, because the modern technology and this overwhelm, everything beyond the microscope, everything going on in the meso and the macro is overwhelming us, that we should feel more at ease and not bogged down and blind our children and our innovative or innocent questions. So I hope other thinking, and for that we need shared models, might be a good step.
One last question. I hear the word shared models a lot in the conversation. Can you give an example of one particular shared model that we could all share and I could pass it on to a friend after the conversation is over?
Yes. I've been showing the visualizations of Harry, that we take a model of the geographic environment, of our contextual environment, of our multilingual, multicultural environment, our aesthetic environment where we have music and other kinds of senses and sounds and vibrations. These can be all brought into common frames of references, and we can just discuss them and put them in color or in music. But if we can also give a context, then it's more easier to discuss about that. So it is like an architectural model. The real architects take an optic to look from inside and look from outside. And he's making an architectural model of a house or of a village to really share futures. So living habitat settlements which are not there yet, so we can negotiate futures.
Is it possible we could distill that down to 1 or 2 sentences when I get off the phone and I speak to my mom and I say, Heiner was talking about, and I love the models that Harry made and it makes perfect sense to me. I get it. I don't know how I could share it to my mom.
Yes, Heiner made a model of what the fields, the magnitudes, and the time scales is about. So we can, whenever we do something, see how it impinges and reflects on others, and where we have a place beside our own eyes, how I look myself, but how I look, like in this meditation studies, how does it look like when we both in meditation see each other with a bird's eye or with a slanted eye from another perspective, that these meditation studies brought about that these hundreds of longitudinal study participants were much relaxeder when taking on other viewpoints and being able to share it.
So if I was to share that with my mom, I would probably tell her the sutra about the fishes in the ocean looking. Oh, you want a timeout? Go ahead, Sam.
I just want to give other people a chance because we're now doing a bit of ping-ponging. And,
no problem.
Two-way.
No problem. I'm going to go share this. I'll call you, Heiner, and tell you how I would share it. But it's a sutra. I believe it's called the Diamond Sutra about the fish and the birds. I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
I apologize for cutting you off. But I do
no,
make
it's
sure
okay. It's fair enough. I want to hear everybody too. Sam, thank you.
I guess one of those others is myself. So I just want to ask a question here, okay? And that is, you know, there's this notion that we have this model of society where we are each acting in self-interest. You know, this is the old economic model of, hey, let's look out for myself and everybody else will take care of themselves. And then if we're fair, then society works, right? I think that that model, especially in the last 5 months, has shown its cracks, its weaknesses. So I think the problem here is we're at a chance to evolve beyond just thinking of self, right? We're now thinking of Black lives. We're thinking of, you know, poor children. We're thinking of people locked up in cages. We're thinking about people trying to escape their own countries. But that's not yet ubiquitous. So I think we have a chance to evolve from I-centered thinking, self-centered thinking, to sort of create this mental model, as you say, where it's not just me in my model, but I've got a bunch of other people involved, and they are live. They have, you know, children. They have concerns. They have values. They have intentions. They have, you know, purpose. And that's a much more complicated mental model, right? It's very simple to say, I want, I need, okay? That is one level of sophistication. to go beyond that, to say now I have N of these, okay? I have Farah's model, I have Glenn's model in my mind, I have Josh's model in my mind, I have Heiner's model in my mind, okay? I have my own model, my kids, okay? And to think about how all of those could be impacted by decisions or perspectives or actions that I take is a much more complicated mental exercise than just to think about myself. But that's the opportunity right now that we have for ourselves, right? So when you're talking about mental models, this is a dimension in which we could expand. And I think we need to be able to do this. This is the privilege and opportunity and responsibility that's ahead of us right now. So I just want to put that on the table as one of the ways that we have to evolve. The second is, yeah?
Let me call it shared federated models. So you see, when we did these workshops with youth, they spoke about the worm's eye, the fish eye, the bird's eye, the group eye, the generational eyes, or the me model, the they model, the other models, the models of the Asian people or the African people, by making it concrete and by embodying it. That's why I always say spatial is written for me with a C. It is extensional, it is immersive. Then we have a chance to discuss it and without and beyond the need to agree and not going immediately, I know what you mean, and fight. So anyway, we are in the last 25, 30 years in cognitive sciences developing that there are cognitive models. Before, and I had to really encounter that, science ignored or denied that there are mental models. And now there are many, like there are many people with many intentions. So anyway, it is more complicated, and I didn't promise you that it will be simple and not perplexing.
Anyone else before I respond to Heiner?
Sure. Sorry, I had my hand up earlier, but I know you can't see it.
You're not visible, Colin.
Yeah, I'm going through a lot of stuff right now, moving stuff around. My computer hasn't even hooked up in 3 days, so you can just imagine how I feel. It's not normal for me to be away from a computer for that long. Yeah, I'd like to speak on the line what Josh had with these models, because that's what's really inspired me from Heiner, is the models that he uses in multimodal thinking, which is, you know, very in line with system thinking, how I appreciate trying to look at the complexity and context. And the model that really stuck with me with Heiner, and it's been said many times here, but just to summarize for you, Josh, it's voices, spaces, and futures. So if you have the ability to have free speech, and you're really using your voice and being heard or accepted into the conversation, then you have a voice. So talking sticks, however, whatever context applies. Then the space, you visualize the space. Again, you see it. Whatever context that it's in. One country's different than another country's context. So voices, spaces, and then if you get those two things down, you get the voices in the space, then maybe you could talk about the future. And that's where, you know, Glenn really shines with the possibilities. And I heard that Heiner started with possibilities. So if you get the right voices in the right visualized spaces, talking about the future possibilities, you know, that's a powerful model. And I think that it doesn't get any simpler than that. And it reminds me of the documentary I just saw when Sweden cleaned up its, I think it was a heroin problem in the year 2000. And they did a big documentary on it. I just watched it. And people are saying, like, how does this work, making heroin legal? Prime Minister made it legal, and they, you know, it helped the people out and get back. So she says, well, the way it works is if you help people, their lives improve. And like, the answer is very simple. So if you can find the right voices in the right spaces, you can talk about the futures. And if you're locked into somebody else's space, locked into somebody else's narrative, you know, good luck with your future. So anyway, how do we look for better has always been the crux for me. And I think you have to kind of do it compartmentalized, unfortunately, with as many layers as you can pull in. But yeah, it has to do with going down to the context so that you have a real voice, a real space, visualized, cognitive or otherwise. Numbers are real to me. So yeah, voices, spaces, and futures. That was the big one that Heiner laid on me. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Others? Glenn? And then I'll go.
Yes. So I'll try to zoom even more into specifics based on what I've heard. And voices, spaces, futures. Then what futures are interesting? So the question that comes up then is, how can we best visualize, first beginning in the imagination and through our communication, how can we visualize the really beautiful global futures where we all win, where we all shine, where there is harmony? And yes, that seems to be like a very, very specific question that seems very interesting based on all this.
Heiner, did you have a response, or can I go? Okay, so this is going to feel a little bit disjoint because I'm following up on a point that was made earlier about the shared mental models business. And I think that the question that Josh asked and that you were talking about is, before we can share it, we each have to be capable of it. That was the point I was trying to make. Okay, we're not going to actually get to shared mental models about multiple intelligences and multiple entities out there who care if we're not individually able to do that. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of collective individuals saying, I want, and then this person saying, I want, and that person saying, I want, without a consideration of what we each are doing to each other. So that was the thought that I wanted to present, just to wrap up, for me at least, for now, that particular theme on just this evolutionary of mental models. The second one is, I made mention of this model of intelligence regarding the military systematic model. Okay, for me, in I guess 3+ decades of looking at scalable collaboration, I've come across, I would say, arguably 3 scalable models of collective intelligence, but most of which require some kind of hierarchical control. Okay, military intelligence is one of those. Scientific academic research is another one. Okay, but there's a lot of built-in culture around who gets to do the research and who gets funding and that sort of thing. So that's the piece people mostly object to when they talk about science not being true, okay? Apart from the scientific principle itself. The third that I find is software development. Software development, in my opinion, is the one that most closely approximates a non-hierarchical view. In other words, anybody can do anything they want. However, there are still local clusters where there is some model of a hierarchy, okay? Josh knows this. There's this benevolent dictator for life model, okay? And there's people actually being granted committer rights to be able to make changes to the actual master version of whatever they're working on, okay? However, despite that, I still find that that is the most autonomous, most free version of scalable collective intelligence. And I just wanted to at least put that on the table for future discussion as well. There may be others, but those are the ones that I'm familiar with. I'm not saying those are the only ones, okay? So I just wanted to interject with that. The third is one that has to do with this boxes notion, okay? I reflect, and if I just step back, Heiner, and go macro on the presentation, the first 15 minutes, one impression I get is there are a lot of words. And there are a lot of new words, words that are not familiar to all of us. So unless I stop and say, okay, what does that word mean in this context? What does that word mean in this context? And unless I actually do that, I'm not fully grokking you. So I have to just sort of absorb by osmosis, the general notions, until I can dive in deeper on each specific point in the future. But the point to this is each word is a knife, right? It separates. Each word says, okay, these things are where the word applies. These things are where the word does not apply. And if you have many such words, there are many such slices in this world and many such slices in our conversation. So then it's bewildering to sort of say, does this map to what I understand, or do I have to create a new meaning for it? So I'm not objecting, I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that that is another way of introducing kind of this bifurcation of models. And that is very difficult to follow in such a very, very, very quick presentation. And until there's a way to lean in and sort of say, when you say meta model, how does that map to what I'm thinking about as conscious evolutionary mental model, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and do that on every one of your slides, every one of your words, because half of them are new. You've been developing these things for 50 plus years, okay? So that's just an observation I'm putting forth about how difficult it is to understand the work. Not that I'm unwilling, but that it's difficult and I have to take steps in order to do that, okay? And therefore, I just want to wrap up with this notion that until we find a way to map these words, to find common meaning, I would just point to Dictopedia again as a way to address that, okay? Then there's this potential to misunderstand, to mishear, and to then misrepresent. And that is the Tower of Babel that is ahead of us today. And there's so much more to talk about, but I'll leave it there for now. Tees has his hand up.
Sam, I'm very aware of that. You see, that's why I tried to put it into 3 steps of the deep dive to really give the history and the motivation and the direction. I believe that we can better tell stories, how we developed it, where we failed, why we made a different step, which changed everything. And if we do that, like in a film, in a fictive, imaginary environment, then we don't have a chance to really have the people coming with us. That's why I try with Jörg Altekruse to do this Youth for Planning, young people filmmaking projects. But all this is taking so much more time. Only to give you an idea how I defined this space and cognitive panorama will take us half an hour, 1 hour, only for this step where I made a difference. And all this is not possible in such an environment where we don't agree on, we do a workshop and maybe we meet over a weekend. And especially in such a virtual environment like this. And I'm fully with you, words are more than knives. Very often you're not aware that it is a knife. You only feel cut.
Thank you, Heiner. Others? More? Tees?
Yes, sorry, it has sunken in a bit. So I heard Heiner speak about augmentation. So a guy that is really made, say, the mouse and so on. So what's the name of that guy?
Mr. Douglas Carl Engelbart. Heiner also referred to him as well.
Yeah, so if Heiner refers to,
more Marshall McLuhan.
If Heiner refers to Engelbart, and now he mentions even another name, so then what does he mean? So if it's augmented reality, do you have a concept of tools to be made like Engelbart has. So which kind of tools should be made, and can this be transmitted to those that are able to make this? So this, what team is that? So, but I mean, just clarify, if you speak about augmentation, is there a difference, say, congruence with what Sam knows about augmentation? That's the question.
I know it's very difficult. It's like virtual reality. Who has experienced virtual reality? What is the danger? What is it good for? What is it when many realities are brought together? So anyway, I can only put some names about certain fields. I cannot go into each container on a big ocean ship. I can just say it has to do with this modern ways, imagination and artificial imagery, and bringing different senses and data and information fields together.
Is it like a science fiction movie then, or is that maybe a part of it?
Well, that would be a very nice idea. We had in this discussion on the next 30 years that Bibi, which is unfortunately not with us here today, said, yes, I want to create such imaginary films. It is like an architect makes a model of something which is not there. We can do it with new tools and create our shared ars memoriae. So how an artist or a presenter on the stage is remembering things by putting it into a fictive virtual fantasy landscape. And as this can be overlaid, and it's not just sound, and it's not just vibration, and it's not just color, it is symbols which mean a lot of things to different people. It is something like with the danger of a cacophony, making us all run away after we heard the third unknown word, or we try to somehow, like in a jam session, come into the feeling and the dancing and the questioning and the doing.
Yeah. The reason I mentioned science fiction is that I've noticed that there aren't many science fiction movies made today that describe futures where we globally succeed in doing something awesome. For some reason, almost all the stories seem to be about one group being in war against another. So clearly there's some unexplored possibility there.
I have a problem. I feel with John Paul and the two names you mentioned, Sam, it would be very nice to go to this cognitive, sociocratic, culturecratic, whatever, into a next round, maybe more prepared than just us announcing this yesterday. And I feel it would be very good. I take seriously what Tys and Glenn said, take it in to really, or what, forgot the name, said, to really how to communicate it to my mother, because then it's a Diamond Sutra, and there's so many other cosmologies and ways of world making and world explaining, that it's a very, very interesting job, which cannot be done in such a session. So my feeling is, first, I'm very exhausted. Second, I have to be in another session. And third, I'm very happy with our 1.5 hours. So I would be very happy that we don't try to linger on to find the next top of the hour, but really bring together. I think Glenn is doing this very well in the past, to really show the way to visionary futuristic filmmaking, but really showing what Engelbart and McLuhan and other people felt, to include other cultures without the fight over right and wrong.
Okay, so at the risk of lingering a little bit, there's a name I wanted to throw in here before we finish. Okay, and that is, and I don't know if I've mentioned this before to you, Heiner, that's Eric Jansch, who is in the same general epoch of Doug Engelbart, but they never actually met. So this is one of the interesting what if scenarios about what if Engelbart had actually met Jansch and talked about social evolution and conscious evolution and coupled that with some of what Doug was doing. And this is, by the way, the mental experiment that Dino was conducting. And that's why I wanted to mention that to you. So I don't want you to necessarily respond, but I think I just want to put that in here just to refer to it if we have a chance to follow up on this in the future. Before we wrap, yeah.
I just want to agree. Eric Jansch, I have many monographs of him, was so central to many of the developments I just mentioned. He was too much a generalist, so he did not really get well established, but he was the root of many, many of the central developments, not only of the Club of Rome.
Okay, interesting to get your perspective on that. Hey, again, this is possibly too pedantic, but Farah, since you've worked for 20 plus years with Heiner and you're here spending 2 hours with us, I'm just curious to see how you would like to add your voice to this conversation, or perhaps give your perspective on it, if you are willing to.
Well, I mean, when I met Heiner in 1995, we had here in Berlin a big event, a summer university, and it was in a period of 1 month, and with 1,000 people participating, and there were scientists, there were artists, and people from the spiritual world, and the question was how to bring all these people together and how to give them a kind of space. And so I asked Heiner if he has an idea what we can do. And so we created this open forum, which meant that every day it was possible on 3 tables to come together. 1 table was Spanish, 1 was German, 1 was English. And Heiner tried to invite people, and we had special guests, we had surprising guests, and they were sitting together and talking. So we were not using a talking stick, but some kind of. And so what was interesting then was, I mean, and I think this is what is behind his thinking. I mean, he often quotes to take your own viewpoint out, what is a kind of Sufi perspective. And the interesting was in listening to the people who were telling story and were telling about very different perspectives. You know, for instance, I remember that one time there was an artist, and of course people asked, okay, what you wanted to contribute, and then you said, well, maybe I can do a flick flack, you know. So he jumped up and demonstrated us for us, you know. So, and well, in those days, we had no internet and all these kind of things. So of course these encounters were something very special for the people, because they felt if we come together and we are telling our stories and our perspectives, and the others are listening, if we put all this together, we have a kind of more complexity, and maybe we could understand that really we are one, you know. And I mean, this is also something, I mean, you mentioned Sam, you know, in summarizing this old worldview in saying, okay, I'm caring for myself, and then maybe you are caring for yourself, and then it will be a good world. But now we have to understand that this is not possible, you know. Well, so I think Heiner has done all these years, I mean, very practical contributions to this, sharing different viewpoints. And I think as you were, Sam, you were talking much about intelligence. I mean, let us say an intelligent use of intelligence. Maybe I would add compassion. I think it would be very essential to go onto another level or into another dimension where we really try to connect our emotions and our mental structures, and to find something we really could express it both, and to put it in our actions, and how we want to create a new society. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that perspective. Heiner, do you want to have any closing words, or are you done? Or do you want to entertain one last question?
I think this compassion is very, very important, and how to make it between all these religious schools. I spoke about sectarianism of science, but also of the religions, with so many gurus and fighters for their egos, to their cosmologies. I would like to open the conversation to a group on science and spirituality I'm attending for some time. It is very, very that we give these Buddhists, the Sufis, and the scientists, and the new cognitive and modern computing guys a common floor. And so for me, we should continue with our experiments. I'm happy that I finally said my 3 steps of the deep dive. I later learned that deep dive is a term already used in English forever. I'm just a diver, so I like imagery and models and ways to explain, so that sometimes you have to really dig into it, and then you maybe get stuck in the mud and need some time to come out. I think I came out. I'm released from the burden to finish the dive, and all the material is available. And in detail, sometimes it's a long ride, and it will be not done even on a weekend. I hope I can continue working with young people, and sometimes to go to some sessions, and we each other can look into what really you refer to, which people I have missed yet on my journey. So thank you. For me, it's fine. Thank you for all being there, and have a nice weekend.
Heiner, can I assume or presume that you will share a link to your presentation?
Of the slides?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. That'll be good. Okay, so at this point, the rest of us can actually continue with regard to what we heard today, or we can bring up any other topic people would like to move. And then sort of in the last few minutes, I'd like to talk about what we were going to do for next week. Kayla's no longer with us. I think everybody else has been heard from. Stacy, you haven't spoken in quite a while though.
Yeah, I apologize. I was having trouble with my internet and trying to go back and forth between my phone. Wow. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I don't even know where. I'll just start at the last one to just add on to what Heiner and Farah were saying with the compassion. Like even Sam, when I was listening to you and you were like talking about, all of our concerns, children in cages and all these things, I was thinking to myself, and there are a whole bunch of people with totally different concerns, like, their jobs are going to be taken away by immigrants, or, some of these other things that, some of us might hear and automatically reject as being crazy. But the fact is, if so many people have a concern, we have to look for that, whatever that string is, whatever that tug is, instead of just automatically saying, well, if we believe that, then we don't believe this, because it's everything. We have to combine everything. And that's what doesn't happen enough. I mean, my personal experience, I might ramble because there's so many things in this session that hit on so many things that I think about. But what is definitely necessary more than anything else is that ability to be able to say something and feel, safe in saying it. And I don't just mean physically safe, I mean mentally safe. Nobody wants to get kicked out of a group or shunned or looked down upon. If you're in the States, or depending what your social media circles are, there's been this one story that's pretty much clickbait, that's about a young boy that was killed by his Black neighbor, that's been going around. And it's from the conservative side, the whole thing has been, where's the rage, where's the the outrage, where's the protest, when there's really nothing to protest about. The person was immediately arrested. Nobody's saying he should get away with this, but they're trying to conflate it with a different situation that has to do with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. So when I, nicely just mention when somebody's calling for protest and outrage, and I say, well, what would the protest be demanding? Just a simple question. I all of a sudden get attacked, which is by somebody I actually know, which is fine because it was clear that he was coming from some other place. But, and there have been other times where people have just blocked me for asking questions that they didn't want to have asked or they didn't want to have discussed. So for me, I think that really encouraging. Oh, and somebody said to me, well, I wouldn't want to have one of those conversations that don't go anywhere. And I'm thinking to myself, well, why does it have to not go anywhere? Like, why can't the conversation actually go somewhere? Like, what would you like to see protested? Yeah, so I'll leave it with that for now. There are other things that I'll save for another time.
And there's a short comment to that. So you asked them, what would the protest be demanding? So you kind of asked them, what would you like to see happen, in a sense, then? Because that's sort of what I see. It seems to be missing in all of these kind of, I wouldn't really call them conversations. I don't know what it is, but
well, that's it. I think the point is that their post about outrage was really just about wanting to express outrage. It wasn't really about that specific story. And I kind of wanted to bring that to their attention by making them think for a second, well, what am I, you know, what I'm mad about is not about this.
It just happened in the Netherlands. A young boy, 24, that was killed by a shotgun. Then a silent protest has been, but the people that were walking in the protest were friends and family, and other people were standing by. So the protest was arranged. So there was a reaction, and then so we know the Black Lives Matter. So then a white man was killed, and the protest was made, and it was organized well. It has been.
But I was wondering, Stacey, did you get any answer to that question? What would they want to see happen?
I actually had this conversation, very similar interaction, probably on about 6 or 7 different sites. So depending on where I was, the one place they got mad, you know, that one person got mad at me, and he's sort of the leader of the page. It's somebody that I know personally from the community. He does a lot, and frankly, he's a bully. And I'm, you know, behind his back, people will tell me that he's a bully. But because he, you know, has social status and that he's very popular, he's among the community, nobody calls him on that. In another group, somebody actually changed the way they phrased it, and they just they put the child that died just with angel wings, just commemorating him, which I thought that was a positive thing. Another page, the conversation just stopped after that. Like somebody echoed what I had said and explained it further. And that was what happened in most of the other conversations, that I noticed there was more discussion and talking, and which I thought was a really positive thing, because it wasn't done in a nasty way. It was actually further explaining the difference between, in one spot, another woman that I do know from when our kids were little, very nice woman, but she's on the right and she's sort of rage filled, and a lot of her posts are about, what about this, or why haven't we heard about that? She asked me why there was national attention when Trayvon Martin was killed, but not for this boy. And I explained to her, this boy's murderer was arrested in less than 24 hours, where with Trayvon Martin, it took some months. So after that, there was no more conversation on that page. But the nice thing was, on a separate post, she engaged with me, so that told me the friend level or the congeniality was still there. And I took that as a positive. I will add something, because this is really what's on my mind. Everything that I hear that we're looking for, like ways to solve some of these challenges, I think that there's a lot we can learn from Facebook in the positive vein. The fact that I was able to use Facebook to now be sitting with all you people from all different walks of life all around the world is a way that I got outside of my box. I used Facebook to help me do that. And I think that there's some positive things that we can do if we think about things a little bit differently. Josh?
Yeah, I really like.
Josh, go.
I really like that you said that, because I really feel that there's an analogy that's used as any technology can be used for whatever. So we've all heard this before, but I'll just say it again. A knife can be used to kill, and it also can be used for surgery, and it can be used to spread peanut butter and jam on your bread. So Facebook can absolutely be used for anything you want it to be used for, no matter what the agenda is of the corporation. But once we're all connected, we get to say whatever we want to each other if we hold that space. And I wanted to thank Colin earlier for holding the space for the work that Heiner's done and spending a couple years to grok it, distill it, and give it to me in a way that I could really understand, which is voices, spaces, and futures. And I love, Stacy, that you are taking all the conversations on Facebook, distilling them, grokking them, going from group to group, and sharing what you've understood to give better understanding to other people. And to me, that is the proper use of social media. And I just want to thank you, Stacy, for doing that.
Thank you.
With that, I'm complete.
Thanks, Josh. I'd like to add a point that seems obvious to me, and it's cart ahead of the horse or cart behind the horse or whatever. But if some of us have messages that we want to try to refine, or we don't really know how to speak well what it is we're feeling, it seems to me that the barn raising is about leaning into each other's conversations to try to elicit what that is, whether you agree with it or not. So, and I think the skill in being able to approach these differences is not easy. And if you trigger people, I think you need tools and icons and symbols to say, relax, there's nothing on fire, it's just an idea. It's not directed at you. You might take offense, you'll get your turn. I find that when you start to actually use these knives to cut words, to define distinctions and nuances as you get closer to the, building a trail, whacking the bushes as you go, trying to get there, you have to do it carefully. And I also think that it's about preparing and getting ready. So am I frustrated that I mentioned 4 weeks ago that we could get together and help Heiner hone his message and workshop it like he suggested he would like to do? Or are we doing that in real time anyway? And that's the beauty of it, that whether we're ready or not, we're getting ready. So as important as the message is, as important as people feel like aligning with the message, I think is the amount that we workshop it to help other people get ready, draw their maps, help them with diagrams, build mini movies. If their story's important, I think Heiner's got an important story, Sam's got one. I think a lot of people here have dedicated a lot of time, and I just feel that I would feel much better if I could be more clear and people could understand me without triggering people. What is it about, the different points of view in the world that cause trouble, and how can we say we have to build a bridge here? We're coming from different places. This is important enough. How do we listen to each other, and how do we get the people who are aligning with us, help us prepare our words, so when we reach that competition point, because it is a competition of ideas, how we can share gracefully without expecting to quote unquote win the competition. How can we win understanding? That's what I'm after, because I may be wrong. So if I win understanding, I can correct that. So it's all in the preparation of me. And I know it sounds really stupid, like homework and, concentrate and focus and all this stuff. But yeah, that's what those maps are for me. Ways to get back, pick up where we left off. And, I would love to see Heiner's message enhanced with all of our different skill sets in a way that we could lean in and maybe workshop it, or even individually, and others here too. I think that's kind of the missing element for me after the deep dives, after the focus sessions. They just kind of linger there in the air, waiting for someone to say, hey, that was interesting. I'd like to help shine that up for you. Like, are you writing a book? Can I read it like Gartrud did? So there's, I think Sam's going to write a book. So I don't know if he's looking for people to help add things. So yeah, in preparing our messages and finding ways to agree and disagree better. And by better, I mean in ways that understanding can be held and remembered. Anyway, I think that's my common drum. I'll just put it in here because it's so germane to the conversation.
If I may riff on that theme with the rest of you, there is this notion of preparing for these conversations. And there's the short-term view of it, which is what's the agenda, what's the theme, what are the ways that, the story gets told. So that's one form of it, okay? And that's a workshop-like activity, which I would welcome, actually. And there's many other ways to look at present preparation, including one that I referred to in the past, which is how do we present ourselves? What is that preparation we bring so that, I'm calm, I'm listening, I'm not triggered, I'm not open to disagreement, I'm leaning into, trying to understand, I'm aware of differences, I'm going to put aside my discomfort, I'm going to look for terms that sound like I understand, but potentially are not. That is a way of showing up. And that's, I think, a set of habits that you create, not just for any event, but, as part of just living your life. So that, to me, is one way that I would connect a possible theme that I'd like to bring either next week or, some other time, which is, and I've alluded to this before, the community of impact set of ideas. I think it's about time to revisit it, because I think this notion of each of us having already a sense of what we see and what we think we need to do is how we want to connect. I've got, as Colin says, my story, my intent. There's Engelbart in the background, there's Johnson in the background, there's other people. Clearly, Josh has his from Occupy, Colin's got his from MAP, Heiner's got his from Earth 2020, etc. And figuring out, not just on an intellectual level, what we could do, sorry, these dogs are making noise, but just how do we get that done while still autonomous, while we create our own set of actions, even before we link up, even before we create the GCC initiative or any other thing that comes about. I think being able to support each other and resonate on that is probably a second or third step. I think the first step is to show up. Second step is really to understand how to engage. The third is a set of connections. Fourth might be some set of agreements. And there's a number of other ways to tell that story. But those are ways that we've been experimenting with here at GCC. We haven't yet figured out what that is, so each of us is struggling with it ourselves. For Colin, it's mapping. For me, it's trying to invite some people and seeding the discussion here and there. With others, it's listening and trying to just provide some resonance. And we each are able to add that, and yet we don't see the bigger picture. A few of us see a picture like Colin in his picture because he draws it for himself. I see it because I diagram it for myself. Others, see it because they're taking very, very careful notes. But we're not sharing all of that yet. And so without that sharing, it's not yet possible for us to say, this is what we can do together. That's something I'm going to do on my own. You go do that on your own, blah, blah, blah. We don't actually have that. Sorry about these dogs being so excited. But
I'm trying to get you to get the other one out of the cage.
Well, I put her in there because I don't want others to get at her food, okay? She's the only one that's really skinny right now.
But is that what he's trying to tell you right now?
No. He's just starving for attention.
Okay.
Anyway, look, I'm trying to connect a number of ideas. Basically, the proposal is soon I'm going to come back and reintroduce the notions behind the community of impact. And that's how I connect with this conversation right here. Over. Josh, you had your hand up.
Well, thank you, Sam, for all of that. I just want to add into a curiosity type of thing, because a neighbor came by while we were talking, and I was just curious how she's coping with what's going on in the world. And she's like, I don't have Facebook, because I invited her to come join us on the conversation. She says, I don't use Facebook, I don't have a TV, I don't have any of these things. But yet she's, like you said, she's starving for attention, as are all of us. And how do we give attention to each other? And one of the things I'd like to just bring up as a thought experiment is, what are other people doing that we've never even thought of that might be kind of fun, kind of engaging, and might even create a community of impact in ways that we could never even imagine? And an example that came up in my head was drawing stick figures of how we feel. So it's very simple. We don't have to really just squiggly lines, and then write a little couple sentences of how we feel, and then represent that with a pictograph of a stick figure. and then put that into, let's just say it was a PDF or infographic or website of a community of feelings, and then draw the stick figure that incorporates all those feelings and animate it all. So I'm just saying something like that, and then just pass it around as a meme. As the animated stick figure is like, I'm angry, all the different expressions that it could be, or love, or this, and then just expressing our humanity is what I'm trying to say, is that we get so caught up in like, well, we have to express it in a way that the war room thinks that is okay, so that the chiefs of staff will understand and take us seriously. And, you know, sometimes it's too much caught up in cultural norms and appropriations, as opposed to just expressing the feeling in a way that's together, a together expression. So I'm just wondering if we could all think of and look at younger people that don't know the cultural norms because they're only like 12 years old or 15 or 17. I had a dream last night of a group of 17 to 18-year-olds that in my dream I had worked with for a couple of years, and I hadn't seen them in 7 months. And I was walking and I saw them all pass by me, and they didn't recognize me at first. And then I saw them and they were so grown up. They were these little 17, 18-year-old adults. And I put my arm around my friend and my other friend that was a teacher, and we said, oh my God, they're so grown up and they're amazing. And look what they've done for this planet, and like how they're going to just change the world. And we were just filled with pride and joy in my dream. And that's what I want to feel for all my friends at all ages, of just, wow, like, and that's how I do feel just coming to these conversations. Like, look at Stacy, look at Sam, how he's taking care of all these dogs. I've watched him raise so many dogs and children, and I'm proud of Sam. I'm proud of you, Sam. I mean it sincerely. And I'm just meeting Farah. Like, I've seen her, I think, once or twice, and I'd like to get to know her story and what she's doing. And I'm so proud of Glenn. I've watched you, Glenn, you know, go to work early in the morning, commute freaking, I don't know if you guys know this, Glenn commutes almost 3.5 hours a day.
I did not know that. Wow.
I'm proud of him to go to work and to make things better for the world. And then the time he spends with not only this community, but also other communities, and the time he spends learning, and the time he spends writing. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Glenn, there's at least 15 to 30 pages that you've shared with me over the last couple of years of brilliant writing that could go into a chapter of a book that we could all publish together, which would probably be about a 500-page awesome book. I would like to read that book.
What would that look like if we each wrote one chapter of a book? That would be very interesting.
Call and tell me.
I'm thinking, Josh, that's a brilliant idea.
Okay, can I just respond to that? But obviously, there's some really big topics here, but I see a few very fundamental themes. One of them is, who are we? Like, specifically, who are we in this room? And Lauren Nignon has done some really good work on appreciative profiling. I watched a video of the Open Global Mind. I saw Sam was there, a few others there, Jerry Michalski, and very interesting stuff. And she had an example of an appreciative profile of Jerry Michalski based on things said by others about the qualities he had to bring. So the idea is basically it's a profile based on the best qualities of each person. And then let's bring in Heiner's idea about negotiating futures. For example, what would be the wishes for the future for each person in the room? That also seems to me as a very essential part of the appreciative profile of each person. So you can imagine it's sort of like a cloud of relevant information around the names of various people who are active here in these conversations and many other places, which have to do with their qualities, their values, certain facts known to be true. and that could be one of those tools which can help us to know each other and know ourselves. What Colin mentioned as well about getting ready, if there's a mutual feedback loop between, you know, if sort of my profile is being co-created by myself and some other people, if we sort of co-create each other's profiles over time, that would definitely, it could be a key into really getting more empathy and more understanding of who we are, but also perhaps about, you know, certain general themes, because I'm sure that many of the, let's say, mimetic complexes that are in the minds of all of us also exist with many other people. So if we know ourselves better and each other better, we're actually going to know a lot of other people better as well. And if we then also can bring in the big dreams and the visions, then we can build even further. So, and then was what Stacy mentioned about her Facebook conversation. You know, when people are outraged and when it's that sort of a dynamic, at least my impression is that the question of futures, of desired futures, it doesn't even come up. That question isn't given space when there's a dynamic where one sort of accuses one another of things that happened before. So that, of course, opens up the question, what would it be if we used Facebook in a way which also gave space for our desired futures? So, and I'll finish with this. So there's two major themes I see. It's who we are, understood as, you know, in an appreciative way. And then it's our wishes for the future. And so maybe that could be, you know, direction that seems very relevant to everything we discussed today.
Yeah, I just want to add that when I was talking about Facebook, in addition to the part that you just mentioned, I was also talking about looking at the group dynamics and why it worked. So I don't necessarily have a story other than I have a desire to help create a container where all the things that have been mentioned here would naturally flourish. So when I look at Facebook, I look at the ability that it gave people to express themselves. I look at what happened, you know, the way people want to become part of groups. And actually, even though they say they don't, we do want to be part of a group, and we do want to be valued and appreciated by the members of our group, and we don't want to get kicked out of the group. So I'm also looking at things like that. You know, a couple of years, for a long time, actually, I've had some ideas, and I had actually discussed them with Colin many, many years ago when I first came into the group. Colin, I don't know if you remember, it was an idea like for a game, and I said, and you said nobody will want to play, and I said, well, maybe I'll do it for my birthday, and I'll invite them to my party. Does that sound familiar? Anyway, Glenn, one of the things.
No, you cut out. Could you ask that again? You said,
okay.
I said nobody would want to play.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, and we used to like just hang out on the phone and talk, and Josh used to come.
Workshop, yeah. No, that's good. No, I think the idea of questioning and building context and the way that you have such an interest. No, I see you as being some kind of a host, and I see, you know, call into Stacy to discuss kind of thing.
Well, what
if you had people working the tech for you behind, you'd be doing great.
Well, what I was
just like a little Joe Rogan.
What I was actually moving towards was this idea of a bigger container. And Glenn, part of that was profiling the people participating. So like, almost like if you think about when you were in camp, I don't know how many of you were in camp and played Color War during camp. Is that familiar to anybody? No, okay. So if you could imagine in camp, at least in the States, at the end of the summer, you have color war where camp is divided into 2 teams and you have a number of tasks that you have to accomplish. You know, and you sing songs, so there's a creative process because some people are writing those songs that you're going to sing. And you do shows, so there's a creative process because people are designing those costumes. And you count on the people who are athletic to win the athletic game so that you gain points. And of course, at the end, you all come together no matter who wins or loses because you all love each other. You've spent the whole year in camp. So in my mind, it was almost like a color war for Facebook, for people on Facebook. That would be, you know, when I first came to, my whole thought was motivation. We know we can be motivated by money and we're not too interested in seeing that happen again. The only other motivation, the only other positive motivation I saw was fun. And I kind of forgot that over the years and it's coming back to me now. So I'll leave it at that for now, but because I want to put my ideas on paper, but yeah, I mean, I see, you know, there are a lot of possibilities where I could see everybody's ideas coming into play, but it takes a few people willing to play with that idea in the first place.
Oh, sounds good, Stacy. Anything is better than nothing if it's moving positive. I do see it as a little bit of a place for not a global thing, but more of a, you know, a campy thing. But if you say it's for Facebook, it could be anything. And just like I'm talking now, you got to be careful that you don't take too many my no's and don'ts as disapproval. Usually it's dissecting the idea with that knife to try to get to the source of the idea. So yeah, I don't want to feel like I discouraged you in any way there. I did the same thing with Glenn, right, Glenn? You know, I definitely cut apart, but I don't want to discourage.
Well, thank you for saying that. But just one more thing, Sam, I just want to say while I can, is that sometimes people like me and maybe people like Glenn, I'm not sure, we have ideas that doesn't mean, like I want to share an idea that doesn't necessarily mean that this is something that I want to do. Because, I mean, it's something I would want to be part of, but I recognize that I am not the best person to do certain things. And yeah, I could take the next 5 years going to Landmark and doing all these self-empowerment workshops and learning how to be that person. But for me, that would be about my ego so that I could do it all by myself. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in throwing it out an idea and hopefully other people might see a way that they could take their own self-interest, because there's nothing wrong with having self-interest, and plug that in to mine and maybe other people's, because that's what I think is important. Finding that place where you can connect your own self-interest. There's nothing wrong with that. Josh?
I actually have my
Oh,
hand up.
go ahead, Sam. I couldn't see you. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is actually a theme that actually has been brought up before, and that is that initiatives and movements are not started by people with ideas, really. The key roles for movements and initiatives are in 2. And I specifically mentioned 2 roles. There's the idea of first follower. In other words, someone who comes and says, that's a good idea, I'm going to help you with it. Movements don't start with individuals. Movements start with someone else who hears an idea and says, that's a good idea, I'm going to help you. And that even in itself, I would say, is not enough. There's the idea that the third person, it's a third person, a triad, in my view, that is where the magic happens. We have many ideas where we have 1 or 2 people in conversation, but until you get that third person, you don't really know whether it has really resonance beyond the 2. So let me just put that out there, because the magic of 3 is really interesting to me. I've had many ideas, right? But until I get a first follower for Global Sim or Tweetch or Dictopedia or anything else, it's not going to go anywhere, okay? And, you know, just like we can talk about other people who presented ideas here. The first follower is critical. The third person is magic. Let me just stop there. Over.
I'd also say there's a 30, 300, and 3 million after that. that you have to conquer.
Yeah, I think what Sam's really saying is that there is an ingredients, and it actually goes back to a book called The Tao Te Ching from Lao Tzu, which is the one pulls it in, the second one assimilates it into their being. So now there's two realities that are the same. And then the third creates this sort of magic of one person has a feeling, another person has the same feeling, and then boom, when there's three realities that are believing the same thing, it really is magic. It's hard to explain it, but if you can see it anywhere in psychology, sociology, and economics, in any part of life, that the three is a magic number. I mean, it's so simple and so freaking powerful. I've had that every time in my life. Whenever I had something I said to someone, and then they went, oh, that's a good idea. And then a third person came along, boom, it got activated. It was like sitting there as a balanced dyad. And then once the third person came on, it activated, because now there were
It
two
becomes
other
alive.
people spreading it. Yeah, it just literally, and it's a line in a passage in Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching that says the one created the two created the three, and the three created everything that is existing. And it's in quantum physics, it's also in chemistry. And that's what H2O is. You can have an H or you can have an O, but when you have two O's and an H, then that water molecule actually creates everything.
Yeah. It's interesting in this space we're in. It seems like we have a bit of difficulty, how do I say this, noise in the system of the signal between the 1, the 2, and the 3. So what is it that happens here where we could, if we were sitting around a coffee table all together physically, we would get a different spontaneity, and people would get their crayons out and actually something would have happened. And, you know, that happens a bit. Tammy built the alphabet code with Harry. And so there's different examples of how that has happened. But I feel like in the moment we take the Saturday, and then it's almost like church, it fades away, where the real stuff to me is the stuff we bring in here. And we got that autonomous thing going on, as Sam was mentioning. So what things are created, what the idea comes from the person, and how does the pod pick that up? And then what's the extra difficulty in this form where we might have constraints like time, money, or commitment, agreement, trust. So there's like, I really feel what Josh said, you know, when you tell somebody something, then they turn to their friend, they say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And before you know it, you're in the car, you're gone, right? So it happens, it comes alive. And then to spread an idea globally, I think happen in waves. If it's a good idea, it'll keep growing. That's what I meant. Not that you need 30 for it to be alive, but so we got like halfway there with this group. There's thousands of people in the GCC, but how many people are actually active? You know, maybe 30. I don't know. So, and what is the noise and the signal between that magic 1, 2, 3? So what can we do to enhance that signal? Like maybe COI is part of that. I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway.
So I'm going to actually be a little bit more relaxed and say, I don't feel a need to create something out of GCC. I used to a long time ago. But I now see that as long as it's positively benefiting the individuals who participate, there's success right there. For some reason, Glenn comes, you know, fairly regularly. For some reason, the rest of you come fairly regularly. If there was no value here, you wouldn't come. I come here to get some ideas, you know, bounced off of you guys, and I give valuable insights and feedback on that. And if I weren't getting any value, if I was just saying, oh, there's, you know, nothing being told me that I didn't already know before, that would be sad. That would be saying, hey, I'm not very receptive at all. I'm not hearing what people are saying, okay? But if I'm actually listening to what Josh is saying, Stacy's saying, Glenn's saying, Colin's saying, everybody, even, you know, even though Tease doesn't speak very often, when he speaks, I listen, okay? So if I actually then reflect that back into my own thinking, eventually something's going to happen. Eventually somebody's going to come up, just like Kayla said, and say, I'm going to help with Team Congress. Or somebody's going to come back and say, I think Dictopedia is a good idea. Or somebody's going to say, COI is a good idea.
those are the opportunities that I can wait for. I don't need GCC to take off like a big, Saturn V rocket ship. These little initiatives are enough for me, okay? I'm not saying the Saturn V is not going to happen, but I'm saying, that's a much more complicated scenario. So I just
totally
want to
agree.
reflect that there is no stress. There's no frustration towards creating this big GCC initiative. I would have to say that is an evolution, because in the early days, many people had that expectation. Over.
I still think there's lingering thoughts and useful stuff in that category, but when the idea of our space becomes more than the person and the group first, the person second, I think it's misguided. I think you're right. The group is a barn raising springboard for ideas, and I guess the point is definitely not to disagree with you on that. And the frustration I get is that of those things that we could be doing, it seems to be the communication part that is really what the value of the group holds for me. My communication, and also how people with differences can communicate. And it's all, and definitely what Heiner was talking about today with having, memes and symbology to shorten and get closer to understanding, which is a fluid thing, right? So it's, and how do you harvest value to move ahead and remember? So these are great preoccupations with me. And I think, Stacy's looking at keeping a ball rolling with a conversation to come to some kind of a conclusion, almost like short stories maybe. So, that book that Josh was talking about, if we narrated an audio book, a chapter, that could be pretty interesting. Think back to Glenn when he was doing his walks in the woods. That was quite interesting. And, anyway, I don't know, something we could produce. But I think there is a little we there. But I think it's I first, what I can bring and what I need, what I could ask for. Thank you.
May I respond to the book idea? I would have to say probably about 14 years ago, I used to be a member of something called the VP of Engineering Community of Practice, VPECOP. There's probably about 20 or 30 people within Silicon Valley who were all CTOs or VPs of engineering at various different companies in Silicon Valley. And we were meeting on a monthly basis to sort of learn from each other, right? How to deal with bosses, how to deal with venture, how to deal with product management, etc. And at one point, I was one of the few instigators that said, hey, there's a lot of experience here. Why don't we write a book? Because we were looking for that book that we wish we had before we got those responsibilities in that position. And there was a model that another group, I think it was called the CIO, COP, the Chief Information Officer Community of Practice. They had written a book about a year or two earlier, and they had done this model where each of them took a topic and wrote a chapter, and then just assembled it all and wrote a book. And I said, that's been done so many times before. I'd rather see a model where each week we gather as a group. We take a topic, whether it's, bug management or release planning or scalability or bosses, etc. And we each talk about that one topic for 1 or 2 weeks and devote like 2 to 4 hours with 10 people involved or 5 people, whatever it is. And then gather those thoughts and somebody write that up, and then we review it the following week. So that model was adopted. So rather than each person saying, okay, here's what I believe about requirements management, here's what you believe about, blah, 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 okay? We each had a chance to reflect on each topic, and then someone was tasked with distilling it all into a written form that we then reviewed and then put into a book. To me, that looks and feels much more collaborative. And by the way, that book was published in 2008. So after 2 years of every Tuesday night having this conversation and doing this process, we probably took 500 or 600 pages and distilled it down to something like 300 pages. And we got a book published. It's called Leading and Managing in Silicon Valley. So that model could be interesting if we wanted to do it. So we could take a topic like agreements or discomfort or leaning in or co-visioning or coexistence. And we actually talk about that. And then Glenn comes to mind. I could do another one. Stacy could do another one. Keith could do another one. Colin could do another one. we can intersperse it with maps, outlines, other artifacts, diagrams, and sort of, collectively come up with a book that each of us would have some influence in creating. To me, that is definitely much more collaborative than to say, okay, here's 12 topics, 12 of us, you write on this, boom, let's put it together, it's done. That is just a model I'd like to introduce for consideration if there was any interest in doing a book/living wiki or something else. Over.
Yeah, that's really
Josh is going, but good to see you today, Josh. And I really hope you're doing well. I mean, goddamn, what you've been through. So
indeed.
Thank you.
Keep it up.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a great conversation, everybody. And it's nice to see everyone's face. And I'm just going to check in on my mom and make sure she's okay. So she asked me to call her. So I just want to say thank you, and let's continue to have fun. Like Stacy said, let's make it fun. I mean, we're lucky to be alive. So as long as we can have some fun, we can create a community of fun impact. Much love to everybody.
See you, Josh.
Cheers. Cheers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's quite a good idea, Sam. And it is the iterative way of getting ready, sort of like going around the journey maps, the journey map of making a book. Each person's chapter could be, the journey map that we share with each other. Here's what I'm writing. That's kind of what the idea is. Once you have a focus on what you need to do, the journey map becomes kind of trivial, like grade 2. I don't really need a journey map. I know I got to write about this particular thing and I'm working with these people. But while we're meeting and coming up with these ideas, that was kind of the work behind that would inspire a kind of collaborative suggestion from Josh, I think. I don't know how that idea actually formed. When he said it, I don't know if what I thought was exactly what he said or not, but that's the collaborative thing, right? So yeah, if we could make a mini one, another way to suggest it would be like a simple little thing like Lauren's doing as well. She's heading down that road, and it's producing each person's little idea bubble. So if we could just do a 5-minute or 2-minute thing on what it would be that you would write your chapter about, that would be a good start to the book before we even write the book. So it could be a living book. I think about a living book, actually, where the map is never really finished. You read the book, but you can go here and see the map, right? And hey, who's to know that I completely changed? That's not me at all anymore. That's the beauty of it. So anyway, I'll leave it there. Collaborative.
And I have to go soon. Yeah, did you want to say something, Sam? Or?
No, Stacy had her hand
Okay.
up.
Yeah, just real quickly, if I could just use this example to clarify something. So Sam, imagine if in this game this competition kind of game, there were 3 teams and one of the tasks were to do exactly what you said in your own group. That was the task. We would then have 3 groups of people who were not only motivated by doing it because it's a good idea, but now you pull in the competition factor. You pull in the fact that you're working with friends. That competition thing is we try to be lofty. We want to, act above it. Why are we trying to change who we are? We're competitive by nature. Why not use it for something positive? So I just want to throw that out there to think about.
I find challenge.
Let me respond to that.
Whatever words you want to use.
Yeah.
My point is, if it were a game to take some of these ideas that could really produce something wonderful, but add some elements of fun in a way of motivating people to actually go along with it. And then if we could get underwritten and get some money, that's also a big motivator.
Let me state for myself a little trigger when you say that, and I mean that humorously, okay? Because to me, it seems a little bit ironic and possibly paradoxical, although I could get over it, that if we're here trying to exercise something in collective intelligence, that we introduce competition into it. So it seems like almost antithetical. Although I think there's a certain way to structure it so that what you were talking about could be achieved. But that's just something that bounces around in my mind, is that if we're collectively trying to be intelligent together, how do we introduce this notion of competition as a collective intelligence
But
tool.
that's the beauty.
I think there are ways, but that's just the immediate shallow, paradoxical irony in it. Over.
So if I could just, that's the beauty of this. First of all, the fact that you're triggered, that's important because that would turn you away from the ideal altogether, which of course you're not doing. But think about it like this. There's an element of competition. However, all of us achieving together is what makes this whole game successful. So even though I'm competing with a different team, it's in my best interest if they're doing as well as I am. And that's the trick, turning it to a positive.
Yeah.
In fact, I've been, sorry, go ahead, Glenn, and then I'll go.
Okay. Yeah. Because I soon have to go. But what I sort of would feel is this: it's like a sort of a game where, take like competitions like Idol or something. Many people, perform something, and some things are. I mean, there's certainly many possibilities of having like certain kinds of games where you perform while at the same time there's this thing we're creating out of it together. So it's a very interesting direction. Of course, when you bring in a word like competition, it's going to bring up a whole can of worms. But what I wanted to just follow up on was this, to keep it more concrete, this idea of writing something together. Like, let's say, for example, each of us bring in a theme that we really care about, and we have a session about that theme, and then we sort of agree that we're gonna try to write something together about each of those themes. So if it's 10 people, it's gonna be 10 themes, and we could give it a lot of time. But then the kind of idea is that one person brings in something they really care about, and we have a good conversation about it, and we can use the chat and what else. And then that person can write something, and others can, that could become a very interesting article. So, and just before I go, also want to say I really hope I can participate more seriously. I really want to do that moving forward, and also do some more writing. And I had this one thing about the question of truth, so I have a note based on that. I can't find the video. I don't know where the video is. It's pretty stupid, but I have the notes. So that's certainly one topic I would love to get into, and I'm willing to do another session on that, and create something written out of it if there's interest for it. So yeah.
If you want me to help you track down a video, I might be able to help you because I have all the transcripts now for most of them anyway. Trying to do a little bit of GCC context work in the background, programming stuff, but I haven't really announced it.
Yeah, that would be great.
I can help you. Yeah, and maybe you could help as well because you were involved in that originally. I think Josh as well, if he's still in the background.
Yeah.
He's aware of some of this stuff as well going on. Oh, Sam, go ahead.
So let me introduce something that's been in the back of my mind for months, possibly years, okay? And that is all the way back to when we did the poll in September and then the walkthrough in November about what emerged in the polls. Remember, the question was, what are the key themes that we're talking about here in GCC? And about 20 or 30 key themes came up. And I did my shot at drawing a diagram that connected them all, okay? So my dream is to take at least that diagram, the nodes and the words and the concepts that appeared in that diagram, the ones that everybody here had an opportunity to provide input into. Let's create a discussion around each of them, and let's connect them as needed, okay? And then let's go back to the hundreds of hours of discussion here and elsewhere. Maybe there's other conversations you're part of in ecology of systems thinking and system science, blah, blah, blah. But at least that set that's here in GCC, identify those little snippets, those gems, as Colin identifies them, and say, okay, let's connect them into these nodes. Here's where we talked about co-visioning. Here's the 20 or 30 times we've talked about co-visioning. Here's what Stacy said about co-vision. Here's what Colin said. Here's what Glenn said. Here's what Sam said. Here's what T said, et cetera, okay? And then put that together so that at least we have that way of linking back to the original source. And then on each of those, each of us has an opportunity to distill it all together and say, what is co-visioning? Or what is co-visioning to me? If not co-visioning to GCC, if not co-visioning to the planet, okay? And let's say each of us has an opportunity to do that. Then on another node, it's governance models. On another node, it's compassion. On another node, it's decision-making. On another node, it's agreements, okay? Because those are the things that pop up in this diagram that, you know, was a result of the poll. Imagine if we had a global mind, either in the brain or in Kaggle or in Workflowy or in Kumu or Lumio or whatever it is, or Trello, whatever it is that you decide, okay? I'm personally going to work on the version that's in the brain, okay? And that's what Carl and Doug and I and others are trying to create, okay? So imagine that we do that. Imagine the richness of that material. Imagine that as every conversation happens and gets recorded, that we take the memes, like those 4 or 5 little monologues I had today, or that, you know, Heiner had, or that Glenn had, or anybody else had, and then connect it back into that brain and enrich the nodes that are already there. Then imagine that not only is it those 24 or whatever number of nodes is, but each of those has other subnodes, like education, for example, which did not appear necessarily, as I recall, in the first version, but obviously is connected here some way, right? And each of the SDGs, they didn't appear, maybe 2 or 3 of them did, but not all of them. Imagine a brain that had all of that connected and associated with when they were discussed, who said it, what other conversations it connected to it, and the links to the raw material. That to me is one dream of the DDKR, the Distributed Dynamic Knowledge Repository. And imagine what that could enable. You could write blogs. You could write books. We could write books. We could create videos. We could create gems. We could create educational resources. We could create courses. We could create who knows what else. And not only would it be a thing that we could point to and say, we created that, but now look at that as an invitation to others to collaborate with us. That to me has been in the back of my mind ever since we did these videos. And that for me is why these videos are recorded. That's the visioning that I'd like to put on the table. Over.
And I love that. I would love to help with that. And on that note, I have to go, but yes, I would love to participate with that. So thanks everyone.
All right,
Wonderful conversation.
send me a message, and I'll I'll hook you up with whatever you want, databases, CVS files, whatever you need. CSV.
Yeah, let's keep it going. Bye bye.
See you, Glenn.
Yeah, I got to take
That
my
sounds
daughter
awesome,
to her JavaScript class myself, so I'll be signing off. Okay. If you guys want to continue, I've made Stacy host, so you guys can continue as long as you want.
I have to leave.
Okay. All right. Good enough. Thanks all for participating. Heiner, thank you for presenting today. If you're able to listen to this later, bye for now. We'll talk next week
Bye-bye.
or tomorrow. Okay. Bye-bye.